Picture this. You're sitting at a dining table. It's Thanksgiving dinner. Your whole family's there. You even got some friends visiting from out of town. It's that weird in-between period between plate two, where if you're like me, you had more gravy than mashed potatoes on your plate. Right? We've all been there. And it's still too early for pie. People are chatting, wine is flowing, conversations are starting to break up into smaller groups. And somehow, the topic of investing comes up. Your uncle, who prides himself on being a good investor, starts talking about his stock picks. And at first, you listen. Then, when you feel like there's a pressure to contribute, but you just can't, you get quiet. You wonder, does anybody else realize that I've been quiet for so long? You feel ashamed at the fact that you can't contribute, but they're all talking so fast, throwing around terms and words that you've never even heard of. You quietly remove yourself from the conversation. How many women has this happened to? I know because it happened to me. And I know I'm not alone. Only 48% of women currently invest, compared to 66% of men. Time and time again, I've watched my male friends talk about the stock market, the fluctuation of the dollar, interest rates, and I would just sit there quietly. And I knew that they weren't excluding me on purpose. In fact, more often than not, I would remove myself from the conversation before being excluded. And yes, it's because nobody explained it to me, because personal finance isn't taught in schools, right? But neither is how to use TikTok. And yet Gen Zs are all experts. So how did they learn how to use TikTok? Well, they downloaded the app, started poking around, they learned the trends and the lingo, and I realized the key is you can't learn how to use TikTok without downloading the app. Learning financial literacy was the same for me. It was scary at first, but then I realized the only way to learn is to just do it. And doing it is scary, right? It involves taking risks, but you've got one shot at life. This isn't a dress rehearsal. Wealth doesn't necessarily make one happier, but financial security can translate into a greater sense of well-being and optimism for the future. People who plan for their financial futures are 43% more positive about their financial outcomes. So I'm here today to tell you that women need to be more self-reliant and learn how to invest. By starting small and starting early, women can build risk-tolerant mindsets that will empower them to create a financial future of their own. When I was 23, I traveled to South America by myself, and it was probably the scariest thing I'd ever done, mainly because I'd never done any solo travel. I was obsessed with the Incan Empire as a kid, and I'd watched the movie The Emperor's New Groove probably one too many times. It's one with the talking llama. So I got to Cusco, Peru, and I decided to do a 4-day trek to the Salcantay Glacier. To give you some context, I live in Ontario. We don't have mountains. In fact, I'd never climbed a mountain before in my life. But here I was in the Andes, climbing to an altitude of 4,600 meters or 15,000 feet. And the people in my pack were also apparently a bunch of very serious climbers. So I want you to imagine it's day one, I'm at base camp, it's -1 outside, although it's July. I'm about to do this trek. I have 2 hats on, I'm about to go to bed, and I'm wearing every jacket and layer that I brought. Wake up is at 4 a.m., and my team is bonding over the fact that they all climbed Kilimanjaro. So I was terrified, but I did it. Climbing that glacier was physically the hardest thing that I'd ever done, mainly because of the altitude sickness. But if I could separate myself from the altitude, I realized all I had to do was climb one step in front of the other and walk on an incline. And that's how I learned how to invest. It was scary at first, but I realized taking risks is the same thing. Even if you're afraid of taking risks, take them. You build risk tolerance by taking risks. So I started looking at ways to reduce risk, and I came across a strategy called dollar cost averaging. And dollar cost averaging is basically where you take the total amount you're going to invest, it can be any amount, and you break it up into periodic purchases. So it's basically investing bit by bit. You buy a bit in January, you buy a bit more in February, and so on. And that way you spread your risk. Start small, do it bit by bit, and separate yourself from the altitude. Now, when I first started investing, this was 10 years ago before I even went to business school, I realized that learning financial literacy for someone who doesn't have a finance background is literally like learning a new language. And the way that you learn a new language is you start with the alphabet and you break it down like a formula. That's how I learned French growing up, so I figured I was going to teach myself the same way. And in the beginning, the personal finance stuff, it really did sound like le flou flou flou. But then I found the personal finance alphabet, and it's on NASDAQ. You can find it too. It's basically a glossary of all the personal finance terms, and because we're in the age of information where everyone wants the answer right away, the ABCs of personal finance are A, accumulate assets. So an asset is a resource or something that has economic value that a person, a company, or even a country owns with the expectation that it's going to provide a future benefit. So an obvious example is real estate, right? Homes ideally grow in value, but so does Apple stock or groups of stocks in general. So we want to buy and accumulate things that grow in value. B is bad debt. We're taught to avoid debt, and I think this is like the only personal finance lesson that we collectively learn, but not all debt is bad. Taking on debt, so you can take out a student loan, for example, that's actually good because it helps you propel your future. It helps you potentially earn a higher salary over time. So taking on debt that's going to increase your net worth or better off your position is good. Taking on debt so that you can lease a nicer car or pay for one too many Zara hauls is bad, because then when you fall into the accumulating credit card debt, you're paying a lot of interest. You're paying a lot to borrow that money, and it sets you back instead of pulling you forward. We want to avoid bad debt. And C is compound interest. Compound interest is interest you earn on your interest. So the longer you stay invested when you invest, the more your money grows. It's literally like the eighth wonder of the world. So I have this friend, her name is Mary. She started investing when she was 25, this was 20 years ago, and she put $5,000 into the stock market, into a diversified portfolio of funds, and every month she adds $500 to this account. In 20 years, she's going to retire with $3 million. But if she started today, she'd have $392,000 instead. That's the power of compound interest. So the ABCs. A, we want to accumulate assets, we want to get rid of bad debt, and we want to take advantage of compound interest. Now, what's really fascinating is the fact that women are subconsciously more risk averse than men, especially when anticipating a negative outcome. And part of the research shows that women feel fear and nervousness more intensely than men. And research shows that because of that, women and men invest differently. And I'm going to share a secret with you guys. Women are actually quite good at it. So there was a study done by Warwick Business School, which is a really big business school in Europe. It's one of the top ones. And they found that women outperform men at investing by an average of 1.8 percentage points over a 36-month period. There was another study done by portfolio managers at Goldman Sachs that found that female U.S. large cap stock mutual fund managers, wow, that was a mouthful, they outperform their male counterparts by a full percentage point. So because women feel fear and nervousness more intensely, they have a more long-term focus when it comes to investing. And we need that long-term focus because the average life expectancy for women, in Canada at least, is 84 years old. There's a likely chance that most of us are going to outlive our partners. And in a world where more and more women are out in the workforce making strides and shattering glass ceilings, we need to take control of our financial futures. I mean, if we're going to break traditions, we might as well do it consistently. So if you take away anything from this talk, I hope it empowers you to start investing. Start small, start as early as you can, separate yourself from the altitude, and take advantage of compound interest.